The Inca are going to draw on the past, on the cultures that came before them, but they're going to shape all of this into a new Andean vision, creating the largest empire of the New World, not just of South America, but of the New World, larger than anything we would find in Mesoamerica or North America. In fact, when it comes down to it, I have to really compare them and their achievement to what it is that the Romans did back in the ancient world, in the old world. The Inca, with this vast territory, and you can see it a little bit on my map right here, running at least 3,000 miles from Chile to Ecuador. They are going to create a vast empire known as the Tawantinsuyu, or the Four Quarters. They're going to do this in a very short amount of time. The dates that I have up there, 1438, that's the date when we really feel that the Inca are beginning to rise to power. 1476, however, is the date that the empire actually begins under the direction of Pachacuti. So from that time until the period that Pizarro arrives in 1532, the Inca achieve the vast empire that we look at and find awesome today. In the map on the right, what we're looking at are the different divisions, different color areas, basically, of expansion. It was a conquest state, and this derives from the practice of split inheritance, which the Inca are going to borrow from the Chimu, along with metal technology. The Inca are going to be, again, like the Romans, they're going to borrow the things that work, and they're going to revision these things into their own worldview. Each of those colors represents an expansion over time under a different Inca ruler, and he would need to, when he ascends the throne, conquer territories to support himself, and after his death, to support the members of his family, who would then rely on his estate. We have no written records from the Inca. What we do have, however, a fairly large quantity of quipus. And you're looking at one that's similar to figure 166 in our textbook. Quipus were knotted cords that were used to keep records. These quipus could record information about taxes, what you owed the government, how much you paid the government. It could keep track of population. It could keep track of troop movements. They also, it's believed, could record stories and poems and histories. They were memory devices, mnemonic devices that individuals knew how to read. Consequently, when the people who knew how to read the quipus died, the stories that are embedded in these quipus died with them. Today, we are able to get an idea from studying the quipus that they do keep records and that they are based upon different colors for different strands. And this is a fiber-based, basically a textile, which remains the foundation media for Andean art in general, but based out of fiber. And each of these strands that's a different color would be related to a different item. The knot position would vary, and that would provide another source of information. All of this together would allow the quipu reader to interpret the particular strand that he had in front of him. These would be easy to carry on the Inca roads from place to place, so you could carry a message from one place to another without much difficulty. They're light, they could be rolled up, and they could be put in a pack and carried quickly along the Inca roads. The image that we're seeing, the map that we're seeing on our right, in fact, is a partial record of the Inca road. The Inca road system is one of the most impressive accomplishments of the Inca. They did conquer rather quickly a vast empire, and in order to maintain that empire, they had to institute a road system that would link it together, and that includes linking the four separate divisions of the empire into a single controlled area. Roads allowed them to do this. Our textbook author claims that the Inca road system is the largest archaeological monument in the world, and I think that she is probably right. It was also infinitely practical, and that's an aspect of everything that the Inca create. It allowed them to send a message from one place in the empire to another faster than the Spanish could get there on horses. How did this work? Well, you had a message that you give to a runner. The runners were called chasquis. The chasqui would run as far as a way station, and he would run as fast as he could. The way stations were frequent. He could get there, pass the message to the next guy, and he could run on to the next way station. It was possible to get a message from the furthest area of the empire in a 9-day period. So this worked pretty well. The road system itself, and we're looking at sections of the Inca Road, was close to 25,000 miles, and that includes the main roads and the branches. It did go through mountains and coastal areas. In the mountains, of course, it's going to be very uneven. It's going to be up and down. Today, around 25% of the Inca Road remains in place, so you can recognize it. Some, and we'll see in a minute, portions of it are still in use. It would include areas that were also incredibly difficult to cross, and I have for your delectation the object in the upper left, which is a rope bridge. It's a suspension bridge over a river gorge in Inca territory, and allowing people to get from one side of the river to the other side of the river and continue on the passageway of the Inca Road. Some of this, then, I guess you could say, is a little bit scary. There is also, let's see, this one is at Machu Picchu. So if you visit Machu Picchu, you'll actually be able to see that. Some of that remains visible. This is another portion of the Inca Road. And in places, it is high up and it gets very scary and very narrow. And we do have a kind of stairway going down to the lower level until we wend our way around and the road will actually widen. So in places it can be very narrow, in other places it can be very wide, but it would allow you to get throughout the Inca Empire from Ecuador to Chile. These are just better pictures, I think. The photograph in the left side of the screen actually shows two people who are using the Inca Road today, or what's left of the Inca Road. This is located in Argentina, and you can see that this is rugged terrain. This is not even ground. It also very clearly makes the argument that wheeled vehicles in the Inca world and the Andean world would have been completely impractical. You can walk by foot. You can also take llamas across this, but nothing else would really work. This is a better view of my suspension bridge. I have a video for you, and I do hope you take a look at it. It's a very short, I think a couple-minute video that shows you the way in which this bridge, once a year, even today, is recreated using traditions from the ancient world of the Inca to maintain the passageway across the waters right here. A few more pictures of the road system to give you, again, an idea of the widespread accessibility of roads in the Inca days. It included bridges, and we've seen one of those, causeways. There also were way stations along the way, and generally they would be a walk apart. Runners would be moving more quickly between these way stations. They would be storehouses. There also would be places for Inca military men to position themselves to help to support and sustain the empire. So it was an important road system, essentially, that helped to keep the entire empire together. It was built by and maintained by mita labor. What that means is, back in the day of the Inca, if you needed to pay your taxes, you did it in terms of labor. One of the things you could do would be to work for on the construction of the roads. Another might be to maintain the way stations by bringing in, for example, chicha beer every day, or bringing in food. But everybody made a contribution. It was a kind of labor tax. And in return, the Inca maintained the working of the empire and also also very generously paid in the form of feasting, paid the people who helped to sustain the empire. I'm painting a pretty impressive picture of the Inca Empire. So you might be wondering, well, how did the Spanish ever beat these folks? And it's a complex answer, but in part, it's because the empire was so new. It didn't actually have the time needed to establish itself. In addition to that, however, in 1528, the then Inca ruler was up here in Quito. He was trying to establish a second capital because the empire had been so, it had grown so widely, it was spreading in all directions, and he was trying to institute stability, maintain stability by putting in additional capitals. So he was up there in the northern section of the empire, and it was there that the diseases from the Europeans began to hit. He died. He died in Quito, and he died without leaving instructions for an heir. Consequently, his two sons fought a civil war. And by the time one of them emerged victorious, the Inca had substantially depleted themselves, weakened themselves. And it's going to be shortly thereafter that the Spanish are going to arrive. Consequently, we have multiple reasons for the conquest by the Spanish of the Inca. But I would also like you to know that they did not go out without a fight. There was incredible resistance. So the arrival of Pizarro in 1532 is not the date of conquest. We usually give it as 1534. I'd like to return to the parallel for a moment with ancient Rome. Both of these two incredible empires were conquest states, and both of them instituted forms of art and architecture which were symbolic of their power and their presence. Both of them, in other words, were using art as a visual expression of the authority of the empire and as an emblem of the empire itself. They also had to be great administrators, both of them, and that did involve a complex system of labor tax in various forms and also providing for the people in terms of water and roads and military defense. In turn, the people would repay it by providing labor for the empire. In addition to that, though, both of these empires approached, I'm going to say, space in a similar way, particularly with the road system. There was a strong effort to control movement, to direct people, and to control the way in which people perhaps even thought and behaved as a subtle reaction to this. So the Inca and the Romans have a number of elements in common, cultural, political elements that might be shared by vast empires attempting to maintain control over a large region and a large population. The Inca had territory that their empire actually ran a longer distance. The Roman Empire, however, was larger overall.